So moving along to our first session for today, which will run from 9 a.m. to 9:55, we have Nicole Smith and Jeannie Bartibogue conducting a welcoming and opening. So Nicole Smith is passionate about conflict management and has worked in the field of harassment prevention and resolution and workplace conflict management for over 10 years. She's a qualified mediator with the ADR Institute of Canada and has a master's degree in dispute resolution from the University of Victoria. Through her company, Nicole Smith Conflict Management, Nicole provides positive, compassionate conflict management services to organizations and businesses all across the province. Nicole has been the chair of the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Center's Workplace Violence and Abuse Research Team since 2020. Elder Jeannie Bartibogue is a grandmother from Eskinopedic, a clan mother and a Jajeg Lobster clan who currently serves her people as the knowledge carrier in research at the University of New Brunswick at the Egpahag district of Wolastoquk. I apologize if I've mispronounced any of that. I did not do my due diligence in connecting with the grandmother ahead of time. Jean has spent nearly 2 decades immersing herself in traditional wisdom and in knowledge of ceremonies. She has worked with residential school survivors as a case manager, advocated for Aboriginal women against violence, and the Women's Equality Committee Advisory. And she has held an advisory position with the Parole Board of Canada. She has worked as a cultural advisor and a project manager for NBCC, Miramichi High School, and Knowlege Mental Health Services, an organization that provides compassionate mental health supports in Mi'kmaq communities. Today, Jean is a member of the Clan Mothers Council, one of the 3 council fires of the Land Peace Foundation, and she assists Wabanaki communities and young adults with land-based healing, providing groups and individuals with counseling, cultural support, and guidance. So thank you both for being here with us today.
Jeannie, thank you so much for joining us. I would like to hand the mic over to you.
Good morning. I'm sorry I had a little bit of tech issues and traffic. So I'm glad that I'm able to join. And I guess I'm just wondering, where did you want me to start? Start the morning off with by opening prayer, or would you want? Did I miss the introductions, or?
Yes, no, not a problem, Jeannie, not a problem. I know that sometimes we can have tech issues. I know Amber was saying that she's had some colleagues that were late coming in this morning because of the first day of school rush. So it's pretty common. We've got bits and pieces like this. We did an introduction. We spoke about your background. I was just talking about the focus on psychological health and safety that we're bringing to the Respectful Workplace Week event this year. If you would like to do an opening prayer, you're absolutely welcome to. We've got until 9:55. We would love to hear your perspective on the idea of psychological health and safety in the workplace.
Right. I'll just make it real short and brief to open up in my language and to acknowledge the day. So I'll begin. Wegi walali ochigi sof dandeli mawaliek eda wakta mayo chidam sekoy wolba miachten. Mi walo no chitandeli abohon muyek. Aheda wakta mayo chidam sekoy namidun. Ochitandeo chikuluk ulam setnege maulugudink. Wegi walali guchidam sekoy dandeli gan muyek. Eda wakta may ochitneng moy akochida bohon madi. Namset nohama. Now my relations. And it's just to thank and give thanks for the morning for today and the blessings that we have. My name is Jeannie Bartibogue, and I am the Kijiji Dwanik at UNB. I've been here since it's 2 years, and it's been a really a good experience. I am a clan mother of the Lobster clan, and I have 7 grandchildren. I have worked many years in my traditional path. I would say that my great grandmother, who was a medicine woman, planted this seed. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be doing the work I'm doing today if it wasn't for her. And so I honor her and I thank her for the experience that she gave me since I was 6 years old. And so that was my first introduction to the sweetgrass ceremony. I'm from Knowlege First Nation. I'm a Mi'kmaq, and I've been in walking my traditional path for almost 40 decades now. It's not that long, and I'm very honored and thankful to be asked to be part of this Respectful Workplace Week. So just a little bit about, I guess, my background and what I'd like to contribute to this is that with my first experience with systematic racism and injustice, and with the fields I worked in. And my first was when I worked in social work and the criminal justice, and I was part of the 60 School. I also attended the Indian Day School. When I I guess I would go back to the 60 School. Was my first traumatic experience that I had with the I would say justice system when the police came and took me from my family and community. I was about 6 years old. And at the time, if you were a single parent, you were considered unfit. My mother had separated from my father, and so there was no question in that system that you would lose your child, your kids. And so if you were a single parent, the police would come and take your children. My mom would have been arrested if she had resisted. Every time a police car came into my community, we would hide. This was my first experience with a system that was designed to work against my people. The so-called justice system in New Brunswick is still designed to work against Indigenous people. Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the population in Canada, but they make up 30% of the Canadian prison population. It's important for you to understand that knowledge in my culture is collective and communal, and it's shared amongst everyone. In traditional Wabanaki governance systems, people complement each other and share in one another's gifts. Everybody has an important role and responsibility, and everyone works together collectively. The people are not in a hierarchical, but rather in a circle. They are all important, and they each support the whole with their knowledge and their gifts. Please just take a moment about the effects of taking people with this worldview out of their circles, away from their families and communities. It's such a different way of living for us, and at times a culture shock. I also worked in the field of social work for 18 years. Outside of my community, I've always been made to feel that I'm inadequate and out of place because of my worldview, and it's so different, and the standards and expectations in this workplace environment are so different. And that even the language that we use to describe or make sense of the work that we do is very different. The reason I became a social worker was to strengthen and support families. When people spoke about apprehending children, it only reminded me of the violence that had been committed against my family and my community. I was never there to apprehend children. I was there to support families, to heal those ruptured circles. But I was part of a generation of Indigenous social workers who were being asked to expect to do things that went against what we believed and how we understood things. I was being asked by my employer and my colleagues to understand my work in ways that didn't match the way I understood myself or the way of my community understood me. I felt this external pressure when I signed the papers to become a registered social worker. It was like I was agreeing to this other way of understanding myself. And if I didn't agree, then I wouldn't be a social worker. At the same time, because of new child care welfare policies, there was a real push to have more Indigenous social workers in New Brunswick. We had all these mandates, but no understanding of what it would take to implement them. Nobody wanted to go and make sure culture was the foundation of the work we were doing or the changes we were making. Child protection was still talked about as the work of removing children from their homes or communities, which is moving them from their own way of knowing. Our knowledge is communal, and it takes all of us being together. And so I became a difficult social worker. I was always fighting the system and the policies and the misunderstandings. And I had a huge caseload. This is how these places and systems burn you out. The idea that your work or your life would be manageable if you just followed these policies coming down from the minister. And again, I did the work for 18 years. And I think about it, later in my career, I worked in probation services for the parole board. In some ways, I felt like a token because it was also been through, because their system had a quota to fill. Not because they want to change how the system works against my people. I was told I couldn't talk about to the inmates because the parole board was separate from the corrections services. I was there to give guidance to the parole board, not to provide any comfort to the Indigenous people trapped in the system. I would make recommendations to the parole board, but I did not make any decisions. Some things have changed since I was a social worker too. The people who go into Indigenous communities are now expected to know something about who they are, who those people are. They've been an overall shift, a more preventative approach towards being more supportive of families. But a lot of things haven't changed, and a lot of education is still needed. For instance, when I look over my past workforce, and then now where I am today, when I arrived at UMB as the elder in residence, people immediately started singling me out to ask about my vision for the university. They were looking for guidance, but I felt this old misunderstanding again. Wabanaki knowledge is communal, shared among all of us, and I can't speak on behalf of the Wabanaki people or on behalf of all elders. Sometimes when people single me out, it was like they were isolating me from other Wabanaki people. They want me to make decisions on my own. But that isn't our way. The answers to the problems that we face in the university or any other workplace can't be simply provided by me. Instead, workplaces need to make spaces for other way of knowing. This collective process of coming to know this way of working together, they need to be open to and accommodating of Wabanaki systems. In terms of advancing psychological health and safety, for Indigenous peoples in the workplace, I would recommend across the board more cultural sensitivity training. This is not to be limited to one session a year, and it should be inclusive all levels and departments of personnel. I sit here and I took the time to really, I guess, to try to address what is so important by writing it down, and so I wouldn't miss out on some of the points that I want to address. The safety of Indigenous employees is the responsibility of all workplaces and employers. And yet the burden of inclusion or of safety still most often falls to Indigenous people themselves. Cultural sensitivity training is almost only offered after an incident has taken place. After someone has already been harmed. The same is true in my current workplace. People come to see me for guidance in moments of crisis or when there is conflict. We often arrive at these moments of crisis because the environment in which people are working are unsafe. I'll give you an example. We had an incident at UNB when a non-Indigenous professor was teaching materials about residential schools. Residential school history is an open wound for my people, and the way in which these sensitive materials were being taught had created a problem for our students. Without intending to, the professor who was teaching these materials inflicted harm on Indigenous students. In response to this situation, elders were collectively able to create a path forward. But when we brought our solution to the instructor, he rejected it and instead chose to have me attend in all the classes so that if Indigenous students needed an elder, they would easily speak with me. The solution then was that nothing would be changed about the course or the environment, but I would add to the room as a person who could deal with a crisis or a conflict if it arose. This has never been a sustainable way of addressing systematic problems in the environments around us, and it has always been a recipe for burnout. The safety of Indigenous employees is the responsibility of all workplaces and employers. And yet the burden of the safety still most often falls to Indigenous peoples themselves. Workplaces need ways of honoring and accommodating Wabanaki ways of knowing. This collective process of coming to know through being who we are together and finding consensus. We could teach you a lot about working together. Think about your responsibility as an employer and as a treaty person. When you take an Indigenous employee, you are immediately accountable to that person's family and community. You know, think about what you might need to take on this responsibility. Guidance from an elder? Will you need to build a network of relationships that can support you as you seek to support Indigenous peoples? Think about what is needed and fight for those resources, supports for all Indigenous peoples. My experience here and in all the workplaces over the years, continue to experience, it might be in a different institution, but it's very similar. And we're still trying and working in breaking down those kind of barriers that has been very harmful to Indigenous peoples. But I sit here and I come into these institutions to find how we can collectively find those solutions. Because we have a generation of our young people that continue to want to succeed and become who they want.
Thank you so much, Jeannie, for your contribution. If you've said everything that you had prepared to say. We have about 15 minutes left for either discussion with Nicole or for questions from our attendees.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. I will say that we have noticed in the chat that there was, oh, go ahead.
No, I purposely tried to leave some time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I did notice that in the chat there was at least one raised hand, so feel free if you have anything that you wanted to ask or contribute to send a message either in the general chat or directly to myself as host. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to share them now.
Jeannie, I think what you spoke to was so incredible, bringing in that perspective and talking about your lived experience. And I wonder, is this a conversation, this topic of the experience of Indigenous peoples in workplaces, a conversation you get to have very often? Is it something that is being discussed often?
Not as often as I hope, but I know that we here at MWC, the Mi'kmaq Wolastoq Center, is trying to provide that space, and we do have treaty relations. When we began, we had a treaty relation week, but it's something that needs to be ongoing. It's not something that should be just like I had mentioned, something that needs to be done quite often during each year, and till we can get that connection and that relationship to one another, can start to look at and understand how we are able to work collectively. And it's not easy, because when you're looking at an institution, it's a whole different structure of the foundation of this structure is not the foundation of our worldview. Yeah.
I have a question that came in from the Q&A for you. Matt McDonald has asked, can you speak a little bit more about cultural sensitivity training, such as what those sessions would look like?
I think it's important when we talk about cultural sensitivities to understanding our worldview as Indigenous people. It's not that far-fetched. People really think it's a whole different, but when we look deeper into our roots, we all have a deeper connection to our earth, to living in this environment together, that the connection to each other is to bring that we can generate that understanding and love for each other. And nobody speaks about that anymore, that connection to love, that spirit. Because when we look at the earth, we look at the trees, we look everything all around us, the environment, that's what's sustaining us, and we need it to keep it healthy. And so when we look at our relationships, when we look at how we interact, we need to start focusing on the humanness of ourselves, that spirit that connects to each and every one of us. Our ceremonies that we have here, we have a longhouse that we have built here at UNB, and it's open for everyone. It's open to everyone to come and learn, and to sit and ask questions. We have a sweat lodge that we have just constructed here as well, and it's open to everyone. A lot of people think, well, it's just for Native people. It's when we go into prayer and ceremony, we're praying for everyone, all race, all nations, that we can come together and live in harmony. And that's but you know, it's separates us when we start to lose that connection in spirit. In my language, people don't realize that when I speak my language and how I would look at English language and my language is all noun based. Or should I? It's I would say like it's like a movie. It's descriptive. Everything we say is descriptive, and that connection to land and connection to the environment, the connection where we are not just in these walls, but the connections to the outer part of creation. And when we talk about cultural sensitivity, we're talking about how we begin to connect with each other in a good way, in a respectful way, and in a way with that we can understand each other. I go to sharing circles. We do healing blanket circles. We do the Kairos blanket ceremony of the history. There's so many ways of learning our the culture, my culture, and how we can connect with each other. Or actually, we have done a lot of different. I've done a lot of different presentations on our culture and our medicine wheel and our 7 stages of life. And these teachings are not just for Indigenous people. These teachings is for everyone. And so we begin to connect each other, and our spirits connect that way. I mean, I'm open for, you know, there's so much that we could do for cultural sensitivity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that perspective. And the question asker has also thanked you for that as well. Great. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, Jeannie, with us about what we as, you know, members of workplaces can do to make sure that we're bringing these perspectives into our day-to-day lives? I think it's a really important perspective that you bring here today. And there are things that we can probably be doing in our workplaces. And similarly, we've just actually got a question that came in on the chat. When it comes to the intersection of class and cultural sensitivity, how do we approach this? For example, this person, Caitlin Hayes, is asking about anti-Semitism or anti-Blackness in workplaces and how that can intersect with issues of class and cultural sensitivity for Indigenous people. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It's difficult to, you know, we've come across many experiences, you know, through university and all the different kind of conflicts for our students here. And what makes it difficult is that for me, it's been difficult because I would be asked something, and then when I would give my answer, you ever give an answer and then it's not even reciprocated, it's not even heard, as if it wasn't shared, and it doesn't seem to have any and I'm not sure if it's because it is of how hierarchical structure. No, I still have I have an idea of how it becomes so complicated only because of the hierarchical structure in that no other way of saying the power and control. I'm trying to say it in a way that don't want to offend, but to work together in relationship as treaty people. But if it's just one-sided, there's no room for any kind of reconciliation, truth of moving forward. And if it is, it's very hard and difficult because of the structure. And I'm not sure if these structures that are in place have the room to move in a way that we can all move together. And I think about, the two-row wampum of the treaty people, of us as treaty people, was to go live side by side. And it's still like this. We're still here, and we're still being controlled and delegated and regulated by a system that has done nothing but disrupt our way of life. And so when I see so much of that, what's happening, I don't have the answers. But I know that if there was something in place that could sit down to talk about and create a safe place to look at ways of how to look at just ways of how we can navigate through a system that can understand, that can see things in a different worldview, sometimes a little bit, then maybe we have what it takes to move forward, to sustain us. Because when I speak, I'm speaking the overall. I'm speaking about the well-being of humanity, of how we can. What is it going to take for us to come together, to start to understand that we all have our way of, as people, what we know success is. And maybe your success is different than my success, or how we go about it. But for my people, I see each and every one of our people that had a gift in all of them to do something and feel good about who they are, if they knew, if they were allowed to be them. And so I see a lot of our own people telling us, you have to get educated to fit in. You have to do this to be successful. There are so much things that they have to go through to be acknowledged and recognized. And that's a whole different perspective than what I was brought up to believe. And so I struggle with it each and every day, because I'm thinking in my language, and speaking to you in English, and sometimes I don't even have the words to say what I want to say or mean. And I'm hoping that I'm still able to come across in a way that we could still understand. But from here is what we forget from the heart, you know? It's not always here. It's here. And I think sometimes that's what we forget. I base everything through not just language and culture, but of that connection to spirit. And I think that's the important piece that's missing. And if we could work around that, I think we could make a better place, no matter where we are. And our people, my people, would feel very comfortable no matter where they go in this world, knowing who they are and how they are, and feel safe. I know I don't know if I'm answered any of your questions, but because my mind is all over the place when it comes to this.
Well, thank you so much. This is such an important contribution, such a wonderful perspective that we all could do well to keep in mind and to be reminded of very often. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for participating this year in Respectful Workplace Week. Feel free if you're interested in staying for today's sessions, any or all of them. It's the same Zoom link all day. So feel free if you're interested in staying or seeing any of the other presentations.
I would love to, and I have other commitments. As much as I'd like to stay, I do have another commitment this morning and this afternoon, and traveling. So, but I am very thankful that I've been invited to speak, and I hope that I was able to contribute in some way.
Great. And our question asker does say that your answer did help tremendously. So thank you so much for everything you shared with us today.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeannie.